Well, hello and happy Valentine's Day, and thanks everyone to joining us today. We're going to focus on improving the prospecting and nurturing process in commercial real estate using both best practices and available technologies. And we'll also highlight those tried and true nurture techniques that keep you top of mind. Our hosts for today are Duke Long and Wes Snow. Many of you know Duke from his blog. His willingness to speak out on the state of technology and commercial real estate has fueled those looking to disrupt CRE. And Wes Snow has been CEO of Ascendix for over 20 years. And Ascendix has spent the past 11 years focused on the commercial real estate vertical and creating solutions that brokers can use to streamline their business. Throughout the webinar, you can ask your questions using the GoToWebinar panel. And there's a Q&A section there, and my team will make sure that those questions get answered at the end of the call. And with that, I'll hand it off to Wes.
Great. Thanks, Camille. And happy Valentine's Day to everyone. Thanks for joining us. You've got some great dates here with Duke and I. So let's get into this. I've got a real quick overview of the agenda. And I promise that most of the structured conversation is going to be probably 30 minutes in duration, and then we'll leave plenty of time for some Q&A on the back end. So let's go through this quick agenda here, and we'll get into the discussion. So I'm going to start off by interviewing, if you will, Duke with regards to his individual perspective of prospecting in the commercial real estate sector. We'll follow that on with some prospecting trends and drivers that we're seeing out in the marketplace, along with some best practices. As always, we want to leave you with some takeaways, some actionable steps, and so we'll go through some of these prospecting takeaways that we see, and then lead into a primer on some of the tools that the marketplace as a whole are using to leverage and accelerate and scale their prospecting efforts. And then lastly, we'll show evidence of one of those tools that we find to be quite powerful in prospecting, that is market intelligence integration with CRM. And then we'll close out with Q&A. And so with that said, let's go ahead and get into the discussion. So Duke, we've been talking about this day for a while, and I'm glad that it's finally come to pass. Let's share some of the wisdom that you and I talk about on sidebar conversations. And with regards to prospecting, why don't you start off by, just high level, giving us your thoughts on the importance of prospecting in today's hyper-competitive commercial real estate marketplace?
Well, thanks, Wes. Since I've known you since you were, 10 years old, so you're only, what, 30 now? You've been at 20 years?
30-ish, uh-huh.
Joking. I've known Wes for quite a while. What I see right now, specifically in the market that we're in, that it's a lot about discovery, which I think everybody thinks it's that way, but it's also what I see in the prospecting part. It's an important way for me to help understand how the deals get created and get started. And with that, what I'm seeing a lot of is people are starting to understand what I call what triggers are. Triggers are what? Triggers are things that help you think, okay, this is what I can help to get a deal started. And there may be many different parts of that, but the prospecting part and the database part is what helps you help understand and define what that is.
Great, great. So let me hit you with another question here. You obviously are leading the charge in some disruptive thoughts on leveraging technology out in the commercial real estate marketplace. From all the research that you've done and reviewed, clearly there's some tools from a prospecting perspective you've run across that you could maybe share with the group here. What are you personally using to stay on top of relationships that you're trying to influence as prospects?
It's not so much that I'm using right now a specific little bitty tool. I think I would kind of refer to the online tools that are out there, access that are out there. A first one to think about for a lot of us is LinkedIn. What a great, amazing resource that's laying right in front of your face every day that you can get a hold of. And then there's other sources that I look at, like Crunchbase, which has a base of all the companies within it. Mattermark. I use Google Alerts. I also think about Twitter and some other things as a way of sourcing what's going on locally. So those are the types of tools that you had no access to, in the past. And think about how you can define those databases, and those are timely databases that you can kind of mine for a little bit, lack of a better term, that you never had really a source of in the past.
Yeah, great, thank you. As far as your tenure in this commercial real estate space, I'm sure things have changed with regards to prospecting. Maybe share a little bit of what you did then versus what you're doing now and the importance of embracing change along the way.
All right, well, and I'm going to start with, again, I started in commercial real estate when I was 10 years old, just like Wes. So back in the day, I had a 3.5 disc, right? Remember that little thing? You'd slide in there, start putting that thing in your little spreadsheet. So, date me on that one. But I think we're now to the level of going from that part of that and creating your own database to having data sources that you never had before and having access to those data sources. And I also think that something that's going on now that a lot of people don't understand, even if it's happening for them, is the automation of those data sources. And that is spectacular. Those data sources are updated by someone else even for you. So to me, that's where we went from 3.5 disc, and I put it all into myself, to, and what data did I put in there? Good data in, good data out. Everybody says that. To now I have access to all the tools that I just mentioned before, LinkedIn, Mattermark, or whatever. One other quick tip that I kind of forgot there for a second that I want to give everybody. Think about all the companies that you're sourcing for deals. Who knows when they're going to move? And usually the people who are providing them money, be it VCs or bankers or whatever, when they're going to move, they know when these companies are going to move. And that's always been a really good source for me. So even now I can database those online, and those are the things that I think we've jumped from the 3.5 to this in this day and age.
Excellent, excellent. You're touching on some things that I want to drill into here in just a moment. Before we go there, though, talk to me a little bit about the prospecting. Is it something that is necessary across the board with regards to commercial real estate professionals, or does it apply more to one line of business than another? Say, for instance, tenant rep versus agency leasing to investment sales. In your opinion, is there one more heavily weighted in terms of importance of this idea of prospecting than another?
Well, the obvious one, I think, is tenant repping. I mean, you've got to go out and source that potential tenant, when they're going to move, what they're going to do. That's the most obvious one. From a sales, or the other part, it's a longer cycle. The retail part and the tenant part, I think, is a little bit easier. I would also think that when you get into these areas of prospecting, you've got some of all through across the lines. It's a little bit about the data sets and some of the things that they're acquiring, and then sourcing those deals and the potential for those deals. That's kind of where I think it's got.
Yeah. Okay. Well, appreciate you sharing. Why don't we go ahead and move on to our next topic here and proceed.
Well, Les, let me jump in here.
Okay.
You and I shared all kinds of conversations over the past years, and I'd like to see if you could talk to me a little bit about what some of the trends and the drivers that you see, because you're out there every day talking to potential firms and people are out there prospecting and get these things. What are the trends and drivers that you see, and some of the feedback that you get every day?
Yeah, so I think we might start the conversation today with 3 primary topics here. The first of which is the aging out of the baby boomers. Secondly, ubiquitous access to information. And thirdly, this consumerization of technology for the commercial real estate industry. Starting off with the aging out of the baby boomers, what I'm seeing, and having been calling in the CRM space for 22 years, the last 12 of which in the commercial real estate space, I'm absolutely seeing a trend where the decision makers that I'm speaking to are starting to become more like my age, 30, wink, wink. But in all honesty, the baby boomers are leaving some of the leather chairs, and they're getting replaced by the Gen X and Gen Yers, folks who have been brought up on technology. They know no world where a PC did not exist, and they embraced technology at an early age, and as a result of that, they are bringing those aspirations and those ideals into the organizations that they're leading. And so why is that important for people on this call? Fact is, if you're not investing in technology, either you're going to be left behind or you're going to be left outside of the loop of the organization that you're working for. It's no longer an option. It's really a necessity. And as we go into these firms, we see some that are still working off of spreadsheets and flip phones. And I can tell you without a doubt, going into a firm where they've properly leveraged and embraced technology, that an individual who's done that could gain somewhere between 1, maybe 2 hours of efficiency over and above the individual who's still kind of going through manual means. And so that's an important trend and a driver to changing behavior with regards to prospecting. Secondly, ubiquitous access to information. This goes both ways. We as a brokerage company and actually knowledge workers have access to more information than ever. We're one Google search away, but so too is the case for the people that we're trying to sell to. They have access to more information than ever. They're more informed, they're more educated. Why does that matter? Well, we've got to approach them differently. No longer are we in an educational mode when we first start to nurture that relationship with them, but we're having to seek other ways to add incremental value and differentiate ourselves from the pack, knowing that they're never more educated than they are today. So I think we've got to be aware of this ubiquitous access to information and make sure that we're taking the best advantage of harnessing that information for our good and not our bad. And then the third thing that I would share with you is this consumerization of technology, especially for the commercial real estate industry. 22 years ago when we started selling CRM, and 12 when we started selling it specifically to the commercial real estate space, we really were dealing with the larger firms. They were the only ones that could truly afford some of these high octane, high horsepower industrial strength tools. But with the advent of the cloud and just the evolution of tools today, those tools that were candidly financially unviable to start out with are now very, very affordable, and they're easy to deploy as well. What took months to deploy and perhaps sometimes multiple years can now actually harness that same type of horsepower and get it deployed in a matter of weeks for nothing more than a cell phone payment a month per user. And so that brings a whole nother realm of possibility in to go in there and leverage this technology. And so those are three things that I see as trends and drivers out there in the marketplace.
Wes, you've taught, again, obviously you're out there every day talking to a lot of people, and you and I talked about this in the past. What type of mindset does it take? I mean, it's not just technology for technology's sakes, but tell me, can you share with the group the mindset that you think that it takes to embrace some of these technologies?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been selling CRM for 22 years, and some of the fundamentals that are at play with any sales rep apply to a commercial real estate broker. Selling in many ways is consistent across the board. And so some of the concepts that I want to share with you today aren't what I'll call mind benders or wow, that was a new and novel idea, but rather a refresher. And sometimes just going back to the basics and having a refresher can be a really good exercise. And so first thing that I'll share with you is this concept of the rule of the harvest. The fundamental need to close business today, it oftentimes deprioritizes our activities to prepare for closing business in the future. We get so busy on closing deal X, Y, and Z, and then when we get that done successfully, then we look and we go, well, the cupboards are bare. We don't have even the foggiest notion of where we're going to go and get our next piece of business. And so I like to look at, in this rule of the harvest concept, I like to look at prospecting as farming. I actually have a farm out in West Texas, and found the best way to think about prospecting is to think about your various constituencies, whether they're clients, partners, or prospects, or reps that you're trying to influence and build relationships with, as your crops, as a farmer would. And you're responsible for planting and feeding and nourishing those, and in time, hopefully, if you've done everything right, harvesting, that fruit for your labor. We know, and the reason why this metaphor is so strong is that crops don't grow overnight, nor do relationships. They require time and attention over their growing or buying cycle. Moreover, each of these crops or constituencies or people you're trying to influence are slightly different, and they cannot be treated the same way or cared for in the exact same manner. They require a different cadence of communication and interaction depending on the relationship type. You wouldn't talk to an investor the same way you would a prospective tenant, and perhaps not even in the frequency, to the point you made earlier. Elongated sales cycles for investment brokers versus tenant rep brokers are at a different cadence. With regards to the crops, again, this same metaphor, it'd be daunting. It'd be a daunting task for a farmer to have to think about going out for each of those seeds that they planted in those multiple crops that they planted and individually water and nurture those plants one by one, hand by hand. And so, not too long ago, some ingenious farmer went out there and developed an automated process like a drip irrigation system, and now can do in one day what would have taken weeks to do in the past. I think we need to think about that same concept with regards to prospecting out there in the commercial real estate space. And really, to scale our efforts, we must think of ways to automate such manual tasks that are involved in prospecting. We just have to. It's a non-negotiable. Otherwise, the reason why we don't do prospecting much is because it is this mammoth task, and it's just daunting, and we just choose not to do it at all because of that. So long and short of it, practicing the fundamentals of farming in your prospecting efforts by exercising patience and persistence for the relationship growth cycle can bear great fruit. So I would just leave you with that metaphor as it relates to prospecting. I'd also say a second point here is it's a numbers game. And again, this is fundamental to sales. Carrying the farming metaphor out a bit more, prospecting and farming, it's a numbers game. Not all seeds planted are harvested. So too is the case with prospecting. Whether we have it loosely defined in our head or come up with some conversion rate based on hard experiential data, we all know that X number of meetings turns into X number of prospects, which then turns into, if we're lucky, business pursuits that we close a portion of. And if we're not honest about those conversion rates, and we're not allowing that to motivate the amount of raw materials or leads and prospects that we're doing, or prospecting that we're doing at the top of the funnel, we'll never bear the fruit and close the business that we need to feed us. And so we've got to know our conversion rate, we've got to know our numbers, and allow that to motivate us to do the appropriate prospecting, which takes me to the next topic, which is being intentional with your prospecting. Hope is not a strategy. Oftentimes we use it and think, well, hopefully tomorrow I'll get a new lead. A quote I heard years ago I think applies here. You can either take action or you can hold back and hope for a miracle. Unfortunately, miracles are great, but they're so unpredictable. So being intentional, it means being consistent and persistent, as I've mentioned. You'll hear some themes here. But it also means caring enough to have something meaningful to say and value add to say when you do reach out to someone, being mindful to provide value before you start pitching them or selling them. On that note, I think it's also a valuable way to look and approach relationship building is to look at it as a relationship bank account. You want to make sure that you have enough deposits in the account to have a balance sufficient enough to make a withdrawal. Think of a withdrawal to be equivalent to asking for their business. Ask yourself how many times you've overdrawn on an account based on that mindset, right? And then the last thing I'll say with regards to some best practices and thoughts to take away is the buying cycle, selling cycle. We all as salespeople have a selling cycle. And it just so happens that every time we bump into a prospect, we're probably not matching up with their buying cycle. We need to recognize that there is a time for us to plant, there's a time for us to harvest, and we need to recognize there's a gap between that. And we could possibly get lucky enough to meet someone and it's their absolute moment to buy, and we can act on that. But by and large, I'd say 85 to 90% of the people that we come in contact with, they don't yet have a need for our service just yet. And so what are we going to do to stay top of mind between the time in which we've gotten in touch with them and the time it is for them to buy? I call that the nurture gap. And you have a decision to fall off after one or two follow-ups, knowing that, hey, I don't have the tenacity and the endurance to stay with them and build that relationship. Or you can buckle down, put an intentional plan together, automate it, and stay top of mind with them until that time to buy comes in. I can't tell you how many times I personally have educated someone, gotten them smart on a need and the fact that there's a service out there that can solve that need, only to have not stuck with them and had someone else get the business. And so let's not have that happen to others here on the phone. And so, as mentioned earlier, I wanted to leave you with some practical prospecting takeaways. And I've kind of sprinkled those in throughout this particular segment here, but let's just start with the first one, and that is defining your targets. setting up an organizational system in your technology of choice, whether it be a contact manager, spreadsheet, wouldn't advise it, or a CRM tool, and grouping those so that you can go out there and segment market. And moreover, as you're defining those targets and organizing them, making sure that the data that you have is accurate. If you've held on to a piece of information, whether it be in a spreadsheet, a CRM system, what have you, there's a distinct likelihood that 20 to 40% of that data is already out of date. Data stales out at about 20% a year. And so before you go out there and spend a lot of energy and get real busy, I'd hate for you to get busy and not be very effective. And so that'd be step one. Again, these are not earth-shattering mind benders, but rather just back to the basics. Secondly, define an intentional plan of attack for those people. As I mentioned earlier, not everybody gets communicated with the same way. And so take those groupings and put a plan in place to touch base with them over the long haul, that buying cycle, right? And mix up things, email. We're all very much in love with email sends because it's easy. The reality, though, is that everybody else is doing it. So I'm not saying abandon email. I'm saying you might want to consider mixing it up a little bit. Perhaps an occasional piece of mail, like, for instance, a handwritten note. Be amazed at how many people have strayed away from the direct mail world, and now if you were to just submit a couple of handwritten notes on occasion, how much more of an impression you might make, moreover than, say, 10 emails. So just think about that in this intentional plan of attack. Thirdly, for those who have a CRM platform already, seek ways to automate these touch points so you can really scale your individual operation like the farmer did when they invented the drip irrigation system. And so it's easy to think about how that might work, where you just hook up the system and you turn the hose on, and next thing you know, you're watering all of those constituents with one action. For those who don't have a CRM system, a real low-tech approach would be simply to set up call blocks or dedicated prospecting blocks in your calendar. The reality is, if it's not scheduled, it's not going to get done. It just isn't going to get done. And then the last thing I would say is persist. Know that relationships are not built overnight. Remember the law of the harvest and that relationship bank account, and just be mindful of that as you go about your prospecting efforts. So we're going to be putting this slide online, and obviously for those who want to go back and reference it, I know I've spun through those a bit, but those are some of the tangible takeaways that I wanted to provide on this call.
So, Wes, you've brought up some different types of tools that kind of have helped, and we had talked about the old school, the new school, bring some efficiencies to the table that maybe weren't there before into the area of prospecting. Could you maybe highlight some of what those are for the group here? Yeah.
So, hey, let's be honest. For those who have ever heard me talk, you know full well that one of the things that we do is CRM, and we do a CRM solutions for the commercial real estate in the name of AscendixRE. Duke, thanks for that shameless plug there with your Yeti cup there.
It is what it is.
And you bet. So fundamentally, you have to have a place to house all your furniture. And that's, in my mind, a CRM tool. Again, I'm not here to sell CRM, but to just educate you today on what is available out there. And Ascendix is built on both Dynamics and Salesforce, but ultimately, what do these tools do? Those that I mentioned and others like them, they're managing the relationships and allowing you to, with the latest and greatest technology, to go out there and leverage technology so that you can do more with less. So CRM fundamentals. Marketing automation. I'm going to show you something here in a bit with regards to how you can automate some of these plans, but whether it's a CRM tool that has a baked-in marketing automation component or third-party add-ons, there is an abundance of tools out there that can really turn you into a marketing juggernaut and a prospecting juggernaut and have you feeling as if you've got 15 people doing prospecting when in fact it's just you properly taking advantage of the technology that's available out there today. And then the last item that may be not as familiar to some of you are market intelligence services like Inside View and Hoover's and Dun & Bradstreet, where these are service providers that have spent their business model is to go out there and aggregate company and contact information and research those companies and contacts and bundle them all up into an accessible data mart that you can consume, and in some cases actually consume within the context of your CRM system, so that while you're prospecting and you're warming up the call and trying to get prepared for a very intellectual conversation with that prospective tenant or investor, what have you, you can learn a bit more about them and not show up with a, hey, what have I done for you lately conversation. So there's a number of tools out there, and actually that segues into what I want to show you, and that is an example of how, one example of how you can use marketing intelligence to help you with your prospecting. And so I'm going to jump into the AscendixRE for Salesforce here. For those of you who are Salesforce users, this is somewhat familiar. I am adding, as we mentioned, step one is organizing your data. And in this scenario, we are going to start the process of entering in a new company and contact record into my CRM system. One of the things that I've learned along the way of selling CRM is that most people, whether they're brokers or just salespeople in general, do not really like the task of data entry. And that's a fundamental underpinning of a successful CRM system, that data actually be inside of CRM. And so we've looked at ways to speed up that process of data entry. And while we were on that journey, we found this provider, InsideView, a market leader in market intelligence, and had a wonderful open integration architecture. And we actually built a bridge between CRM and InsideView to not only speed up the process of data entry, but as a prospector, as you can see here, when I've entered in Cisco, it's found a match in the InsideView database that, when clicked on, unveils a great deal of information that I may or may not have had available to me. The industry that they're in, their physical address, these things oftentimes are on a business card and are something that we may or may not type in. But other things that are not on a business card and as a result probably are not typed in are things like the number of employees, the annual revenue, and the SIC code. And so these details can help you in your market segmentation and also educating you and informing you on how to prepare for a prospecting call. And so in addition to making you smarter, it also makes you more efficient by allowing you to quickly take that data and populate this form that in the past I would have had to type in on my own. I'm now bringing all that data in, and so my prospecting efforts have sped up exponentially with that one element there. Moreover, we know that we do business with accounts, but we talk to people, and so while we may have known a couple of people, one of which might have been the name on the business card that you started this whole data entry process for, we know that we don't really establish deep and meaningful relationships with prospects with just one contact, but rather try to establish a deep and wide relationship with any company that we're going to spend meaningful time with. And so in this integration and having access to these contacts with a simple click of a couple of check boxes, 3 check boxes, I can hit the save button and immediately have access to all of that data regarding Cisco Corporation and the corresponding contacts that I've just flagged here. And so we see the phone number, the website, all the details that were once inside the InsideView database have now populated my CRM system. And moreover, I go to the related area and I can see the contacts here, all of which I didn't actually type one character in. And so it really speeds up the prospecting part of the top of the funnel here, call preparation and so forth. And moreover, with this integration with InsideView, in addition to facilitating the entry of data and expanding your relationship footprint, there's also an opportunity to leverage their research panel. Now, this is another offering that we have with the InsideView product called InsideView for Sales, and it allows you to gain access to the research that they've aggregated in their data service. And so here we see an overview of the corporation, things that we saw earlier with regards to their physical address and so forth, but we see some other business events here like bankruptcy and restructuring, company presentations and the like. And so if we go down from top to bottom here, we see other details, the firmographics, industry profile, what are the challenges. These are all wonderful call preparation details that allow us to approach them with a sensitivity to where they are in their business cycles, to the financials if they're a public company, family trees allowing us to traverse up and down that, and then moreover looking at various other people and decision makers in that space along with any social elements. Duke, you mentioned Twitter and Facebook and such, and so this is just one one way to go in there and consume and aggregate all of that data. Here we see tweets, Facebook posts, as well as blog entries as it
Wes,
applies.
real quick, something to think about that I pay attention to on some of these social things. When you click on those, you'd be amazed at who some of your competition are, or even people within your own industry are following those people, so they're also paying attention. So it gives you a little market intelligence, just off something that simple.
Absolutely. So this just a small piece of evidence of what's possible out there in terms of, as Duke mentioned at the top of the hour, the information is abundant out there. How are you harvesting it? And CRM combined with these market intelligence tools really equip you at a fairly low price point to go out there and be dangerous with regards to prospecting and such. So with that said, we promised that we would leave some time for Q&A, and we are almost spot on with regards to the 30-minute time frame here. So I hope that I didn't go so fast as to not have that make sense for you, but I did want to make sure that we had an abundance of time for the Q&A. So
some
Camille?
of us have ADD.
Yeah, so yeah, I understand. Appreciate that in full. So that was one of the reasons I cut 30 of the slides out per your instructions. So, with that said, I'm going to hand it back over to Camille and see if she can maybe field or at least give us some of the questions that might have popped up throughout the presentation. So, Camille?
Yeah, I have one here. It says, does your CRM have a mobile-friendly app? So not so much about Data AMP, but about CRM.
Yeah. I mean, that's it's a bit of a non-negotiable now. We all realize that sales folks are not chained to desks anymore. They're out and about, certainly in the commercial real estate sector, and the need for the information does not stop once they leave the office chair. They need it out in the field, and so mobile solutions are abundant out there, and they come in different shapes and sizes.
Another one is, I'm using Apto, so do I have to change to AscendixRE to get these tools?
No, the Data AMP product is not something that necessitates that you have an AscendixRE product. If you've got a Salesforce instance, whether it be Apto or just a generic Salesforce instance, the Data AMP product works with no issue there. So you don't have to be an existing AscendixRE customer to benefit from it.
It says, is Inside View part of the Ascendix package, or is it an add-on?
Inside View comes in two flavors. There's the Data AMP product, which is largely a data entry facilitation tool, and the Inside View for Sales research panel that you saw is an additional solution as well. So for those that are interested, I could actually break that down for you a bit more. I don't know that we have the time, and I certainly didn't prepare any pricing information for this webinar, but if you've got interest, I can certainly follow back up with you. But they are sold separately, just as a quick answer to that question.
Wes, I got a quick question.
Please.
I get asked every day, and I say this, and I get emails, and something I wrote was the top 5 CRMs that I think that are out there. Obviously, you guys are one. I get asked every day, which one should I use? How should I use it? Whatever. I guess the question I'm asking is, how do you differentiate yourself? What is Ascendix uniqueness that you feel that you provide for your customers?
So I'll answer it this way. We've been doing CRM for 22 years. You'd imagine, and we learn a few lessons, that some of which are about the technology, but some of which are about the best practices of what it takes to truly get uptake on a rollout of CRM. And you might be surprised to know that uptake of CRM has very little to do with the technology, but more to do with other things like the people and the processes that you're trying to automate and how you roll it out, and just attention to detail and the cadence and speed of the rollout. So those are lessons that we've learned over 22 years that apply not only to generic implementations, but certainly to the commercial real estate sector. I have been doing commercial real estate CRM for 12 years. We've also been able to truly understand the marketplace and evolve our product with respect and reflecting the questions that have been asked and the requests that have been made. Candidly, starting off with the dynamic CRM solution, we found ourselves saying no to very few things and backed away and said, you know what, if we ever had a chance to kind of hit a reboot, we might choose to go at CRM a bit differently. And so now we've got both Dynamics CRM and Salesforce. We're kind of positioning the Salesforce solution as a more streamlined, physically fit version, if you will, of AscendixRE that really focuses on that feedback that we've got on what, and the lessons learned on what is being used and what's not being used, and take that which is used, make it part of the product, and that which, while it clearly is a commercial real estate feature and functionality, but is never used, discard it. It's just noise, and so we've learned those lessons. So those are some things that I would say differentiate us. It's the technology, but also the experience you have with us with regards to best practices and what makes CRM successful. I would also say that some of these advances that we've made in third-party product integrations like DataAmp help you to, when you join the AscendixRE family, you've got some native integrations, and we're showing you one today, which is DataAmp, but there are a variety of other tools that are coming out on the App Exchange that we're going to be plugging into the product as well. So those are just some fundamentals to answer that question.
I have they're actually kind of rolling in, so I'm going to try to get through them pretty quickly, Wes. It says you mentioned that both buyer and seller have same info, so how is it that we approach it differently or harness this info to bring? And I think that was to what Duke you had mentioned previously as well.
I'm not sure I understand the full intent of that question.
Duke had mentioned that both buyer and seller have the same information, so like everybody's got access to, but he's asking how do we approach it differently or harness this information, I'd assume like in a new way.
Yeah, well, Duke, I'll certainly let you respond, but I'll say this, is that we should all walk into every deal assuming that the information that we have, there's a high likelihood that the individual on the other end of the transaction has that as well, or soon will have it, and we should not use that as a differentiator, but table stakes, and we should look for other places like service level, promptness, and other areas to differentiate ourselves other than an information advantage. Duke, I'll let you chime in as well.
Yeah, and that's a great example, and I'm thinking of a classic example of somebody I know out in Orange County where the actual tenant went out and did their own survey of some of the availability of property out there, and then the actual brokers kind of called them and got upset with them because they were out looking for their own stuff. And I just can't imagine where an informed consumer is not a good thing. Getting back to the information part of it, again, differentiating yourself from your service level and all those things. So assume they're going to have it, and assume they're smart enough to figure it all out. That, holding that data in and keeping it, I'm not sure that does anybody any good.
Right.
Okay. Next one was, are there any marketing automation systems you recommend that will work well with Ascendix?
So, before you just jump out there and assume that a marketing automation tool is necessary, it might be worthwhile, and again, Ascendix is on both Dynamics CRM by Microsoft and Salesforce. It might be worthwhile to, based on the need, look inward at the tool itself. There are a number of workflow tools that exist there that can allow you to do an abundance of automated processes. So I'd start there first. Thank you. Thanks, Duke, for taking a picture.
Take a picture of myself, take a picture of myself.
Perfect, perfect. So there are a number of tools that are inside of CRM, but in both the Dynamics and in the Salesforce, maybe much so in the Salesforce, there's this ecosystem of apps called the App Exchange, where there are no shortage of add-ons that can allow you to maybe go beyond what is available for you inside of the CRM tool. So, but I wouldn't assume that that's where you have to go initially. You might actually be able to do a fair amount of automation just with the tools inside of the CRM that you've already invested in.
Okay. What is the future of CRM systems, and do you both think that it will be a one place to do all CRE functions so you have CRM and then multiple add-ons?
Well, that's
Let me ask it again.
That's about a half hour of me and Wes on the phone.
Our next webinar will be.
Well, I'll tell you, there's been a pendulum swing in terms of school of thought here. There have been some, I call it the front office, back office continuum, and ideally and intellectually, that seems like a great idea to have a 360-degree view of the relationship of the customer. What I have found is that most of the people that are in sales and marketing, they don't care as much as would need to be the place to justify that kind of an effort. we started off and actually considered joining a firm that was a back office firm because of the promise of this front office, back office integration, only to find out that most of the folks that we were selling to as CRM and Salesforce automation practitioners could care less about the integration. Hey, I'm going after the next deal and the next deal and the next deal. I'm a report away from getting the information I need in the back office. So we see that pendulum swing, and I'm already starting to see it swing back to where no, it's important for a data mining perspective and for business intelligence, this artificial intelligence. Really, it's hard to do that if you don't have everything aggregated into one data store. And so we'll probably see several iterations of thought and prevailing thinking on that. But Duke, what are you seeing?
Well, without getting too far out there, certainly AI, the artificial intelligence part, I've seen pieces of it and I've heard pieces of it, and I've actually had demonstrations for it. One of the things that I think about that, though, is when you create that AI or that possibility of the AI prospecting or helping you prospect, who's actually teaching or showing what that needs to be in the data that goes in there? So again, the data that's there and how you're utilizing it is still important, even though you may automatically having someone or having the computer respond to something, there's still the other personal aspect of it. I certainly see that, and especially in residential, it's already starting quite a bit. So that piece of it is there. How do you harness that part of it? And then still, you say, well, it has to be a personal, it has to be a relationship thing. I certainly get that, but maybe you're also not thinking about how you can really utilize some of these tools to help you gain those deals in the first place. Yeah. That's what I think. That's what I hear a lot.
I'll circle back to this one theme, and it's been terribly consistent. That is, if it's not easy to use, I won't use it. And I would rather have easy to use and limit my amount of information than to have too much information and it congest the form and congest my user experience. And so we've erred on that side and found that most resonate more with that. And perhaps it's a journey that you have to take them on, where you start off with a very easy to use and simple template of data. And then once they've understood that, their paradigm may shift and allow them to accept maybe the complexities of having a larger data set, which represents the back office and the front office information together. But I'll tell you, as a starting place, that's a very difficult place to get lift off for most of these folks, and that they just simply want to do some fundamentals. So we may have beaten that horse to death on that one, but anything else, Duke, on that?
Well, again, you can have all that technology in the world, but you're the one who's deciding what it should be and how it should be going. And there's a lot of people out saying, oh, the computer will figure it out better or faster. Maybe so, but, you know, I don't know. That's kind of sounds fantastic, but you still got to go out and put the deal together. So, again, simplifying it, I think, is the smartest thing, and that's what we're talking about. Make it easy and put it in there.
Okay. So I think this is an inside view question, Wes, about their data. How often is the corporate data updated for reasons of accuracy?
Yeah, so probably the best way to answer that is to kind of give you a backgrounder on how the data is actually harvested. You know, there are certainly sources of data that there are what I'll call list purchases, but a vast majority of the updates come from those that are publicly out there on the web and are able to be, you know, that data those updates are able to be harvested, and then that is used to update using algorithms and human effort. So, you know, the initial purchase, but that's really just the baseline of the data, and then for those that are highly visible and in the news, that data actually serves as the change agent to actually update the data. Then it's validated using a process that they call triangulation. And then also looked at an oversight with human eyeballs. And so there are multiple layers there that ensure the accuracy, but also the frequency of that. So there's not a one answer for, well, they update all of the company and contact information on a weekly basis or what have you. It actually comes in based on triggered events that are largely being consumed and grabbed from the internet as a whole.
Okay. Now this question came in after the discussion on CRM, and he said, really great description of things in general, thanks. And it says, could you mention some main region-specific options that should be taken into account? And I believe that's around the collection of data and information in regions with CRM and market intelligence tools.
Yeah.
Is there anything regional, I guess, that we need to take into account?
I'll let Duke speak to his perspective. Certainly from a company and contact data perspective, I think you'll find that Inside View and other tools like that are somewhat nationwide. So from a domestic perspective, you're going to find that most of those regions are consumed and included in those nationwide data marts. With regards to data outside of company and contact, i.e. property listings and so forth, obviously you've got the usual suspects, CoStar, LoopNet, and so forth, but then you deal with some of the challenges of integrating legally, if you will. Duke, what are your thoughts on regionalized data sets that may or may not be company and contact data?
And I can use, just an entire state as an examples. For the most part, most of the brokers that they'll aggregate their data in some way, shape, or form that has some kind of localized board, for lack of a better term. But then you get into the other deeper dive stuff that gets into, you've got all these companies that say, we'll sell you certain data sets, and most of these brokers already know a lot of these sets, and I'm not sure they're integrating them into their CRM. And when I say that, permits, construction, all those different things that most brokers think about naturally that helps them trigger that, are they integrating that into their systems? You've got divorce records. You've got all these different types of things that, again, trigger a deal. What I see is a lot of these tech companies go out and, hey, we're doing every possible economic development scrape, and we're going to sell it to you. Well, if you're a good broker, you pretty much know a lot of that in the first place. That's my opinion. And if you don't, you're going to pay to get that information sent to you. Maybe that's okay. So I think the CRM has a good possibility of putting that together. And somebody had asked before, is it going to be all in everything? That's a question for Wes, I think, because can you be all in everything? Do you become what? Where do you stop? Because I think if you've got 5 different brokers, you're going to have 5 different uses, even in a similar market. So what is that data? Is that data really important from a retail standpoint, from a consumer standpoint? Some of the stuff I'm seeing now is that a lot of these tech companies are starting to what they call source or crowdsource the consumer to say, okay, hey, we found out X people on Twitter are saying they think it'd be great if we had a Whole Foods on this corner. Is that 5 people? Does that make that viable? So they're using that type of data sets. And is that something you integrate into your CRM down the road? I don't know. That's a question for Wes maybe. I don't know how much value is there, and how do you know if that's good data or not? And the other basic stuff a broker should do anyway.
Yeah, I read an article in Duke, actually. It was it may have been an interview that you'd conducted with someone, I've forgotten where she was from, but she made a great point, and I resonated with it, and that is that while we attempt to try and automate and homogenize commercial real estate, it's actually not on the surface. It may look like commercial real estate is a simple game, but when you think about all the walks of life and the different transaction tracks that happen, tenant rep has a slightly different interest, and they're going to walk with a different cadence and use different data triggers than, say, someone in the investment sales. And when you think about trying to solve all that in one CRM system, while it's certainly technically possible, ultimately the end user suffers because of the congestion of all of those problems being solved in one solution. And so ultimately the question comes to, is there enough value in sharing a similar database to have all these users there and congest that experience for them at the same time? And what I'm finding is that most are saying, you know what, we probably ought to divide and conquer. While there is some corporate value and visibility across geographies and even lines of business, it's not worth the pain of that we have to go through from an end user adoption perspective. So I know
let me give a quick example real quick. Everybody says, look, I just want one spot. I want to go in, I want to load it up, and everything's there, and I do this. I'm like, well, look, you don't have any problem punching any button on this phone to get wherever you need, but when you want to go to work, you want to pull up one platform, and it does it all for you right there. All your prospects, all your properties, all your listings, everything right there for $12 a month or something like that. And that's just not even realistic.
Yeah, right.
Not even realistic. And do you really want all that? So again, how much of this phone do I actually use? 10% maybe, probably. Right. And there's certain things that I use more than anyone else or less. I don't use Facebook ever. So that to me is one of the things, we want it all in one spot. Probably not. Probably not. And everyone says it's siloed, and it is, but maybe that's not a bad thing.
Okay, and I'll make this the last question. We went a little longer than we expected, which is great. And I am a small company with just 4 users, and they can't afford to have all these different tools and applications, what would you suggest they do, or where should they begin, based on what you're sharing here today?
You get what you pay for, and as Duke just mentioned, $12 is not the entry point there, but nor does it have to be $150. And so I would tell you that there are solutions, and I'll just shamelessly plug our Foundations edition of AscendixRE, which is $49 per user per month. That's probably about as inexpensive as you're going to get for an adequate leveled CRM platform there. And so small users, good news is you can start off with one, try it before you buy it, and even trial it before you even spend $1. And then at that point, hopefully it will justify itself and you can expand that out to 4 users. Of course, if that's still beyond your budget, there are some other solutions. Outlook may and unfortunately have to be the place that you start with, but there's a contact manager, Outlook, small business contact manager or something like that Microsoft has come out with that's even a lower price point. But with those lower price point tools, you'll have limitations and there'll be some restrictions that you have, but you have to deal with your realistic constraints there. But those would be my initial thoughts there. But like I said at the outset, the financial barrier to entry has come down considerably, and you'd be amazed at what you can do with that $49 expenditure.
Yeah, and I'll jump in here. All the different presentations that I have, I ask people, raise your hand if you're using the CRM. And if there's 100 people in a room, 1 or 2 people will raise their hand. So I blame you, Wes, for that, first of all.
I'm doing my job.
I'm just kidding. But the point is, if you're in this business and you say, I absolutely have to have access to property information and listings, I get that. How about handling the actual deals of the people who are going to do those deals, the prospects themselves? So I think it's an underutilized tool, and the cost is minimal. If you're saying, well, if I do X deals, everyone says that. But how are you not managing the actual prospects that you're going to do the deals with? I just can't. It's very underutilized in my opinion, and always has been. Of course, I was an early adopter, but still, how much is that a month? How much do you spend by DirecTV? It's like $150 a month. I don't watch anything anymore. So anyway, I just think it's very underutilized and could be a really quality way to compete against some of the people in your marketplace.
Well, Camille, any other questions?
Nope, I think that's all we've got for today. Most of it also will share a few handouts that I promised to send during the Q&A session, just on some basics of how much CRM costs and some just different feature and functionality. So we'll share that as well as the recording. And the takeaways that Wes mentioned here, we have those in a separate handout that you'll be receiving as well post-webinar. So I want to thank both of you guys for taking the time to share. And
of course,
can recognize.
Of course, of course.
Out. And if you have any questions, you know where to find Duke and Wes. Yeah. Their Twitter handles are right there on the screen, or on email. And so I thank you guys for your time.
Great. Thanks, Camille.
Thank you guys for getting me on here and teaching me even more.
Thank you, Duke. I appreciate it. Yeah, appreciate it. All right. Thanks, everyone. And with that, it's a wrap.
See you later.
All right. See you, Duke. Bye now.
See you.